They shoved her into a windowless room, clipped her judicial ID from her coat, and laughed as the clippers buzzed to life. With each braid that hit the floor, they stripped away not just her hair, but the respect they thought she didn't deserve. What they didn't know was that in less than an hour, the woman they tried to humiliate would walk back into that courtroom, not as a victim, but as the judge presiding over their reckoning. On a brisk fall morning in Greenville, South Carolina, the city was still stretching awake. The sidewalks shimmered with early dew, and the golden hue of morning sunlight cut long shadows across the front steps of the James E. Longworth Federal Courthouse. Pigeons scattered as the city's heartbeat started to pulse, distant traffic, the hum of street sweepers, a soft murmur of life. Judge Danica Truesdale stepped out of her charcoal gray Lexus, a worn leather case in one hand, and the weight of her calling in the other. She moved without hurry, without spectacle, a quiet authority wrapped in a slate wool coat and tailored slacks. Her long, silver-streaked braids were twisted neatly into a high bun, the ends tucked tight. Every step she took across the plaza echoed faintly against the old brick facade. She wasn't in her robe yet, she never wore it outside the courtroom. That was intentional. Danica believed in walking into public spaces as a citizen first. Her power wasn't stitched into cloth. It was rooted in presence. The courthouse lobby greeted her like it always did, sterile lighting, marbled floors, and a security checkpoint manned by officers who rarely looked past the badge they were supposed to protect. This morning, though, something shifted. It started subtle, just a pause too long, a glance too sharp. Deputy Wade Merrick, broad-shouldered and buzz-cut, stood near the metal detector, arms folded. His posture said he'd been waiting for something. Or someone. As Danica approached, her badge visible in the clear pouch clipped to her coat, Merrick straightened and moved directly into her path. "Ma'am," he said, voice edged with disdain. "I'm going to need you to step aside." Danica paused, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "Is there an issue, Deputy?" He didn't answer right away. Just looked her over, head to toe, skin, hair, posture, his expression souring like he smelled something offensive. "ID doesn't look real," he muttered. "And you're not on the expected list. You'll need to come with me for enhanced verification." Danica remained still. "I'm a federal judge. My badge is clearly displayed." "There is no legal basis, ma'am," I said now. His voice snapped like a branch under pressure. Other guards glanced up but said nothing. She held his gaze, then slowly reached into her coat, retrieved her federal judiciary identification, and held it out. Merrick didn't even look. He snatched it from her hand and slipped it into his pocket like it was a receipt. "Let's go," he said, gripping her arm. The touch wasn't brutal, but it wasn't respectful either. It was the kind of grip that says I can if I want to. Danica looked down at his hand. "I do not consent to this. You are violating federal protocol." Merrick ignored her. "Standard procedure," he grunted, steering her away from the checkpoint. The hallway he led her down was quieter than the rest of the building, lined with closed doors and old security monitors. As they passed one of the assistant clerks, a young Latina woman looked up, startled, her eyes meeting Danica's briefly before she quickly looked away. They reached a small, windowless room, gray walls, metal bench, a utility cart in the corner. On it sat latex gloves, a handheld scanner, and a pair of electric clippers. Danica's heart began to race, but her voice remained even. "This is unlawful. I am not under arrest. I demand immediate release." Merrick closed the door behind them. It clicked shut like a lock. "You're acting suspicious," he said flatly. "And you fit the description of someone flagged earlier this week. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Danica didn't respond. She knew this wasn't about security. This was about control. About power. Two more officers entered, one tall, with anxious eyes, the other younger, clearly unsure why he was even there. "Get her seated," Merrick barked. One of them moved behind her, hands at her shoulders. "You don't want to cooperate?" Danica turned slightly. We'll file formal complaints. Go ahead, Merrick cut her off. But first, let's make sure you're not hiding anything in that bun of yours. He reached for the clippers, flicked them on. The buzzing sound filled the room like a warning. Danika's breath hitched. If you touch my hair, that is assault. You want to argue semantics, Judge, he sneered, as if the title were some joke. Should have come dressed like a real one then. The younger officer hesitated. Sir, maybe we should. Sit her down, Merrick snapped. Danika didn't scream. She didn't struggle. She lowered herself into the metal chair, slow and deliberate. Her hands folded in her lap. Her spine remained straight. But inside her chest, the storm began to stir. The clippers met her scalp with a coarse buzz. Her braids fell in sections. One by one. Soft thuds as they hit the floor. She stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, her dignity sliced strand by strand. One officer muttered, "Guess she won't be hiding anything now." Another chuckled. Merrick smirked. Now she looks like someone who understands where she stands. Danika didn't flinch. Her voice was quiet, but it cut like steel. You will answer for this. Merrick leaned in. You people always say that. Then go home and write about it on your little blog. He motioned to the door. You're free to go. Courtroom's down the hall. Try not to be late, Judge. She stood. Calm. Collected. Her head exposed, scalp stinging from the rough clippers. She retrieved her badge wordlessly from his desk and walked out, heels tapping softly on the tile floor. But each step carried weight now, not shame, not defeat, but fury. Focused. Quiet. The kind that didn't explode. The kind that built. The kind that would reshape everything in its path. And in less than 10 minutes, Deputy Merrick would realize who she was. Not with shouting. Not with violence. But with silence. And it would be the loudest thing he had ever heard. The door to the courtroom stood just ahead, and for a moment, Judge Danika Truesdale paused. Her heels clicked softly against the marble as she inhaled, slow and measured, the chill from the courthouse vents brushing against her newly bare scalp. It still tingled where the clippers had buzzed, angry red patches hiding beneath her calm expression. She didn't reach up to touch it. She didn't fix her collar or glance at her reflection. There was nothing to adjust. What was taken from her this morning could not be fixed in a mirror. But what was rising in her now, that could not be silenced. She stepped forward, hand tightening on her case file, and pushed through the courtroom doors. Conversations died mid-sentence. Chairs creaked. Heads swiveled. A wave of silence spread through the gallery like a gasp too stunned to breathe. The woman they had just seen escorted away like a criminal now walked down the center aisle, uncovered, unshaken. Her scalp raw. Her pace unbroken. The bailiff who usually called the room to order didn't speak. He didn't need to. Every person in the room had risen to their feet, not out of obligation, but reverence. No one had to be told who she was anymore. She reached the bench, her black robe folded neatly across the chair like a waiting witness. She took it in both hands, shook it out, and draped it over her shoulders in one fluid motion. It settled against her back like armor, and she turned slowly to face the room, eyes clear, voice firm. We will now proceed with the matter of United States versus Greenville Police Department, she said. No tremor. No hesitation. Just the voice of a woman who had survived a morning meant to break her. The attorneys fumbled through their notes. Reporters pressed record. The gallery leaned forward, breath held. The prosecution called its first witness, a retired postal worker who had been tackled during a peaceful protest and left with fractured ribs. His voice trembled as he described how he'd held a sign that read "Protect the People" and was met with force like a criminal. Danika listened, expression unreadable, hands folded neatly on the bench. The second witness was a mother whose teenage son had been dragged from his car and arrested for filming officers. Her hand shook. The courtroom was still. The third witness was different. A former Greenville officer. He sat straight, wearing a cheap suit and shame like a second skin. I was told to turn my body cam off, he said. I saw what happened to those kids. I stayed quiet for too long. Danica nodded just once. Her voice never rose. She asked no unnecessary questions. But each word, each nod, was a brick being laid. A reckoning being built. And still, Deputy Wade Merrick had not been seen again. Until the recess. The courtroom had thinned, the gallery cleared for a short break. Clerks whispered behind folders. Bailiffs exchanged glances. Danica remained seated. And then, in front of the mostly empty courtroom, she called out, "Deputy Merrick, approach the bench." The silence hit like a drum. Merrick appeared from the side door, stiff-backed and wary. His uniform still crisp, but his eyes hollow. He walked forward slowly, like a man approaching a cliff. "State your full name for the record," she said. "Wade Thomas Merrick," he replied. "How long have you served at this courthouse?" 12 years, he said, trying to steady his voice. Danica tapped her pen once, then opened a slim folder. "There are 12 formal complaints filed against you, dating back nearly a decade. All dismissed. All buried." Merrick shifted. "I didn't know you were a judge," he said, almost pleading. Her gaze didn't waver. "And if I hadn't been?" Silence. "Would this morning have been just another day where you shaved a black woman down like a prisoner and laughed while doing it?" He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. She closed the folder. "Effective immediately, you are suspended. Formal charges are being submitted to the Department of Justice. You will be escorted from this room in restraints." Gasps echoed from the doorway. A federal official stepped forward, dressed in a gray suit, envelope in hand. "Your Honor," he said, "I've been asked to inform you that your case is now under review by the DOJ's Civil Rights Division. There is video evidence. It's already circulating across national platforms. CNN, MSNBC, Twitter. The response has been immediate." He handed over the envelope. "You are not alone in this." Danica took it, but her eyes remained on Merrick. "Remove him," she said. 2 bailiffs approached. Merrick tried to step back. "Wait, I didn't," but the cuffs clicked anyway. He was led out silently, the same way he had dragged her only hours before. No explanation. No dignity. No control. When the courtroom resumed, Danica stood again. "Before we continue, I am announcing a policy initiative effective immediately within this courthouse," she said. She lifted a manila folder labeled in bold, "The Truesdale Protocol." "This policy will enforce mandatory anti-bias and trauma-informed training for all courthouse personnel. It establishes anonymous channels for reporting misconduct. It institutes annual external reviews by federal observers. And it imposes a zero-tolerance policy for racial or identity-based harassment by any employee under this jurisdiction." She paused. "These measures are not symbolic. They are structural. They are necessary." The defense attorney, who had tried earlier to dismiss her case on grounds of conflict of interest, didn't speak. He stared down at his notes, his hands unmoving. Across the gallery, faces watched her not with pity, but with awe. What was supposed to be a routine evidentiary hearing had become a national reckoning. And Judge Danica Truesdale stood at the center of it. Unflinching. Unbroken. The proceedings continued. Witness after witness. Evidence after evidence. The courtroom buzzed with the kind of energy that comes when silence is finally replaced with truth. But Danica knew this wasn't just about one day or one deputy. It was about a system that had let it happen over and over, until now. And she wasn't just holding court anymore. She was drawing the line. The gavel struck once. The hearing paused for the day. And outside, on the courthouse steps, a quiet crowd had started to gather. They held no signs. They carried no chants. They just stood, watching, waiting. A city on the edge of something long overdue. Inside, Danica returned to her chambers. Her scalp ached. Her throat was dry. But her spirit? It was sharper than ever. Because she had not just survived the humiliation meant to reduce her. She had transformed it into something greater. And the next chapter would not be written in shame. It would be written in truth. By the time dawn broke over Greenville the next morning, the air carried the kind of stillness that comes not from quiet, but from shift. The storm from the day before had passed, but the sky remained gray, and the courthouse plaza glistened with the shimmer of early dew clinging to concrete like breath held too long. Inside, the James E. Longworth Federal Courthouse felt different. The architecture hadn't changed. The ceilings were still lined with dull fluorescence, the walls still carried old portraits of men who had never imagined a woman like Danica Truesdale would someday command this space. But the energy in the building was unmistakably altered. Clerks spoke softer. Guards who had once stood rigid now avoided her gaze. And on the courthouse steps, long before the first gavel would fall, people had begun to gather. No signs. No bullhorns. Just presence. Silent, steady, witnessing. Inside her chambers, Judge Danica Truesdale stood in front of the mirror. Her robe hung on its usual hook. The light above flickered softly, casting a pale reflection of her scalp, now beginning to itch in patches where stubble was growing defiantly. She ran a hand across it, not with shame, not anymore. There was power in what remained. She turned as Jasmine, her clerk, entered with a file pressed to her chest and a different look in her eyes. "They're ready for closing arguments," she said. Danica nodded, her voice steady. "Any word from the DOJ?" "They've concluded interviews with the last 4 witnesses. They're filing charges against Judge Barrett and 2 senior court officers." Sandra Kerr's testimony helped push it over the edge. Danica breathed in deeply. "And the Truesdale Protocol?" Jasmine gave a small smile. "Already adopted in 2 other districts as of this morning." Danica simply said, "Good," and turned toward the courtroom doors. She didn't wear her robe this time. Not yet. When she stepped into the chamber, it was full, standing room only. Lawyers pressed into the side aisles. Reporters sat crammed on benches. And beyond the rows of officials and journalists, ordinary people filled every space: former defendants, public school teachers, sanitation workers on their break, grandmothers with hats pressed to their laps, law students scribbling notes feverishly. And in the second row, a young black girl, no older than 16, sat with a shaved head and a hoodie pulled down, her eyes wide with something between reverence and recognition. Danica's eyes met hers for a second, and the girl nodded. Danica nodded back. No words exchanged, but something passed. The room stood, without instruction. No bailiff motion. No call to rise. They simply did. Because they had seen what she endured. And still, she came back. Danica reached the bench, stood behind it, and didn't sit, not yet. Her voice rang out, not loud, but commanding. "Before we begin with final arguments, the court would like to enter several items into the official record." She signaled to Jasmine, who stepped forward and handed her a thick folder. The label was simple and sharp: complaints reviewed. Violations confirmed. Recommendations filed. This file contains every complaint previously submitted against Deputy Wade Merrick, all of which were dismissed under supervision from court officers and Judge Richard Barrett. The murmurs that followed weren't chaotic, they were stunned. These names have been sent to the Department of Justice, the State Bar Association, and the Senate Judiciary Committee for full review and disciplinary action. The defense attorney shifted awkwardly in his seat, his previous confidence long dissolved. "Some may argue," Danica continued, "that my experience compromises my impartiality. But I argue the opposite, that surviving abuse, and still choosing justice, qualifies me more than ever to understand its weight." Her gaze swept the room. This courtroom is not just a chamber of law. It is a space of reckoning and repair. We will no longer pretend. Silence is neutrality. Not here. Not anymore. She nodded once. Proceed with closing statements. The arguments that followed were polished, rehearsed, and necessary, but they were not the center of the room anymore. The center was the truth now anchored behind the bench. The final witness stepped down. The prosecutor returned to his seat. Then the door at the rear of the courtroom opened. 2 federal marshals entered. Between them walked Wade Merrick, now dressed in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front, shoulders slumped like the uniform weighed more than he did. He didn't look up. The room was silent, not with vengeance, but with gravity. Danica didn't blink. "Mr. Merrick," she said, her voice even, "this court finds you guilty of abuse of power, violation of civil rights, and obstruction of justice. You are hereby sentenced to the maximum penalty under federal law, 6 years for abuse, 5 years for civil rights violations, and 1 year for obstruction." She paused, letting the numbers settle. Then she continued. "But that is only the legal part. Now, here's the human part." She leaned forward just slightly. "You spent over a decade deciding who was worth dignity and who wasn't. You used fear to protect yourself. You saw citizens as threats. But today, you are no longer protected by your badge or by silence." Merrick's head lowered. "You will serve your time not as an officer, but as a man accountable for what he chose to do. You used silence as a weapon. Now justice will speak where you tried to silence it." She nodded. "Take him." The cuffs clicked. The marshals led him away, the same steps he had taken her through only days before. There was no clapping. No cheers. Only stillness. And it meant more than any sound could have. As the door shut behind him, Danica turned to the courtroom. "This courtroom," she said, "will no longer be a fortress. It will be a mirror. And it begins now." The rest of the day moved like something sacred. Arguments concluded. Motions filed. But every person who left the building did so a little quieter, a little straighter. Conversations spilled out onto sidewalks and parking lots. Outside, news vans packed the corners of the block. And as Danica stepped through the front doors later that evening, the light had begun to fade. She walked without her robe again, coat wrapped against the cold, scalp bare under the silver sky. On the steps, an older black woman approached her with a slow, cautious grace. Thick glasses, church hat in hand, eyes brimming. "I never thought I'd live to see someone like you do what you just did," she said softly. Danica took her hand gently. "You lived it," she replied. "I just had the microphone." Behind her, the same girl from earlier, the one with the shaved head, stepped forward. No words. Just a look. Then the girl pulled her hood back, stood taller. Danica nodded. That was enough. That night, as she stood on her front porch with the courthouse lights now just a faint glow on the horizon, her phone buzzed with headlines, interviews, White House statements, Senate emails. But she let them all wait. The sky was dark now. But inside, something shone bright and steady. And when she stepped into her courtroom the next morning for a simple custody hearing, no fanfare, no cameras, something happened that had never happened before. Everyone stood. Not because they were told. Not because of the robe. But because justice had a face now. And that face wasn't asking for permission. It was leading. The story of Judge Danica Truesdale is fictional, but the injustice she faced reflects the reality many people in this country still live through every day. What happened to her inside the walls of that courthouse was not just about humiliation. It was about the deep, systemic forces that try to strip people, especially women of color, of their authority, their humanity, and their right to simply exist with dignity. But Danica's silence was never weakness. It was restraint. And her return was not about vengeance, it was about transformation. There's a lesson in her story for all of us. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand back up when the world expects you to stay down. Sometimes justice doesn't roar, it walks quietly into the room, exposed and unbothered, and changes everything simply by refusing to look away. Danica didn't just seek justice for herself, she made space for others to step forward, to be heard, and to be protected. That's what real leadership looks like. Not demanding power, but using it to protect those who never had it. If you're someone who has been dismissed, disrespected, or overlooked because of who you are, I hope this story reminds you that your presence alone is powerful. Your dignity is not up for negotiation. And when the systems around you fail, sometimes the most radical act is to stay standing and tell the truth. And if you're someone who's been silent when you saw injustice, let this be your invitation to speak. Silence, too, can cause harm. We all have a role to play. Not everyone is a judge or an activist. But every one of us has a voice. And justice cannot live in silence. On behalf of us, Justice Stories, I want to thank you for listening, for watching, and for staying until the very end. This channel was created to spotlight stories like Danica's, not just because they're powerful, but because they matter. Whether they're real or inspired by truth, these stories hold up a mirror to our society. And that reflection, uncomfortable as it may be, is where real change begins. So if today's story moved you, challenged you, or stayed with you in any way, please consider sharing it with someone. Start a conversation. Ask a question. Be the person in the room who refuses to look away. And if no one's told you lately, your voice matters. Your story matters. And justice needs all of us. Thank you for being part of this community. We'll see you in the next story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to never miss a story that speaks truth to power.